You guys, I'm just gonna get straight to the point for this one right away. Amnesia the Bunker might just be the scariest game I have ever played. And I'm not just saying that to inflate Frictional Games' ego or anything. Lord knows these guys are already masters at creating worlds that are simultaneously incredibly interesting as well as spine-chillingly terrifying. Their entire catalog of video games are full to the brim with unique experiences, each hell-bent on making you find new ways to be scared of something. Despite each of them pulling from different subgenres to engross the player in an effective narrative, the roots of horror are still firmly planted within, allowing for new nightmares to manifest in creative and unsettling ways. And that's probably the cherry on top for a lot of Frictional's creations. It's because the games make you feel invested in what's happening within their worlds, but at the same time being completely afraid to move forward within them, that you get a memorable experience playing through each individual title. But somehow, with this latest entry in the Amnesia series, the Bunker takes it all to an entirely new level. That level also just so happens to be straight down, beneath the very crust of the earth, in the middle of one of humanity's most brutal conflicts in history. Frictional Games is a Swedish video game development studio founded in January of 2007 by two novice video game designers, Thomas Grip and Jens Nilsson. While the two hadn't done any major work on video games leading up to their collaborative efforts, having mostly freelanced some small gigs online, the two came together after working on a common interest project and decided to go all in shortly after its release. Frictional's first commercial project was called Penumbra Overture, a first-person adventure horror game, and the lead in a trilogy of titles based around a singular narrative. The final game in this planned trilogy was cancelled, however, with their then publisher Lexicon Entertainment having expressed doubts and concerns over a long-term plan for the fledgling studio. So Frictional scrapped the untitled third game and worked elements of its narrative and design into the second, Penumbra Black Plague. Later, even more elements from the cancelled third title were incorporated into an expansion pack for Black Plague in 2008, titled Penumbra Requiem. After gaining a foothold in the industry, Frictional decided to branch out on their own and commit to creating and publishing their own works. After the release of Requiem, they immediately got to work on a new IP, changing the setting drastically and moving away from the science fiction themes of Penumbra. By using the experience they gained on the first outing, they created what is arguably one of the most influential horror titles ever to be created. On September 8th, 2010, Frictional released Amnesia: The Dark Descent worldwide on PC. The game was a resounding success upon launch, and blew up to massive popularity thanks to a number of online personalities and Let's Players posting reactions and playthroughs on YouTube. While the game itself contained all of the usual trademarks of a Frictional project by this point, with a well-developed physics engine, interesting puzzle design, and a curious narrative pushed by a haunting atmosphere, it was the internet culture around the game that really threw the game into the public's eye. With a custom story function added that made the PC version of the game more expansive, the game fostered a network of fans and creatives linked through the internet at a crucial turning point in online video culture. As such, the game spiraled past its initial revenue projections, selling approximately 30,000 copies in the first month, but then blowing up after going viral to over 1,300,000 copies in just 2 years. This game became a launchpad for an entirely new franchise for Frictional, now having a devoted fan base and a prospective new property to play with. The thought of a direct sequel intimidated the staff, however, with founder Nilsson admitting that they didn't have a proper vision for a follow-up after The Dark Descent's release. Looking for inspiration, Frictional turned to another independent developer in the space, a development studio simply called Chinese Room, and worked together to create the second entry in the Amnesia franchise. A Machine for Pigs, using the same physics engine and puzzle system, would release in September of 2013 to mostly positive acclaim. In an attempt to not let their franchise and creative freedom grow stale, Frictional decided to shift gears and create an entirely new IP in lieu of drying up the Amnesia franchise early. During the final hours of Machine for Pigs development, a new title was conceptualized and would take the form of something Frictional had never made until this point. Moving away from the distant past and instead into the distant future, Frictional would debut their newest title to the world in October of 2013, dropping a teaser trailer with a very different atmosphere and tone. While still playing on irrational fears and the dread of the unknown, players quickly took notice of new design choices and aesthetics presented in the teaser, namely the high focus on futuristic technology and the setting of the game being placed on the ocean floor. Soma would release on September 22nd, 2015 to the world, and with it an entire cascade of new enjoyers and critiques. While previous entries in Frictional's lineup would focus on a lingering deadly threat, Soma took things in a different direction. While still agitating the player's fears of the deep expanses of the ocean and unfeeling lethal machines, the narrative in the game draws attention to the concept of the human psyche, attempting to define and quantify a person's consciousness. This turns the typical survival horror that Frictional had been known for and flipped it on its head into a psychological horror, bringing new uncomfortable terminology and thought experiments to the forefront of its design, separating itself completely from previous games in Frictional's lineup. Soma went on to achieve critical and financial success, earning several high scores from video game journals and reviewers, and selling over 90,000 copies in just its first week alone. By 2017, Frictional had enough confidence in themselves to properly establish a headquarters office, and moved their local and remote workers to a studio in Malmö, Sweden. Upon arriving and setting up their new digs, Frictional announced the production of 3 new titles, thanks to the success of both The Dark Descent and Soma, 2 of which would be entries in the Amnesia series, with the third being teased repeatedly throughout their development. Production surged in the creation of their first game, titled Amnesia Rebirth, the first in their official expansion to the in-game universe. In an interview with Eurogamer in 2020, Thomas Grip explained that they wanted to create a game closer to their original works that expands the world while applying narrative and world-building lessons learned from the production of Soma. To that effect, they created a new perspective that allows players to understand Rebirth without having experienced Dark Descent or Machine for Pigs, especially so with the latter having been mostly a spiritual sequel rather than a direct one created by a different studio altogether. An intentional focus was put on the aspect of dread and misfortune in Rebirth, with less of the typical fight or flight gameplay present in previous Frictional games. In fact, the desert the game takes place in was chosen purposefully as a way to show off spectacle and focus on the theme of survival the game was trying to convey. The world received Amnesia Rebirth on October 20th, 2020, just in time for the spooky holiday season. Once again, a massive online following helped push the game into the spotlight, having been the newest canon title in the Amnesia series in 10 years and 5 years since Soma. With this extra layer of attention, more keen eyes and seasoned horror game enthusiasts were drawn to the title, and a bit of modern scrutiny found its way to the game. Many detractors tend to point out the game's overextension into the narrative elements of Rebirth. This game gets tossed into the walking simulator category often, and it's not that difficult to see what they're talking about. Rebirth uses a lot of exposition to convey a story, whether it's through flashbacks or from text items that shimmer in every new space that the player enters. While cutscenes themselves don't happen often, segments where characters speak happen more frequently than in other games, and there's less gameplay sections of dealing with terrifying otherworldly foes. Puzzles in the game come through at a regular rate, but that often becomes more what the player focuses on than anything else. In general though, Rebirth earned many positive scores from review outlets and fans were clamoring for more. The hype for Frictional's return to the Amnesia franchise was overwhelming, and the positive response was taken in kind. A new experience was about to drop on the world in terrifying fashion, and based on the critical reception alone, the world was not ready for what it would receive. On December 1st, 2022, Frictional released the announcement trailer for The Bunker. It showed a very simple few shots of a player taking a path through a dark bunk room and out into a hallway, where a monster gives away its presence in the darkness before the player fires upon it with a single bullet in their equipped revolver. It was a simple, short, and to-the-point trailer, and most importantly, it got the internet buzzing. Direct combat with the visceral threats was unheard of in Amnesia games, and with the previous few releases in Frictional's library having been more narrative driven and less reliant on gameplay mechanics, the parallels were few and far between. During development, several staff interviews reiterated that there is a classic Amnesia feel to this new game, however a new approach was being taken to the game's design. Their goal was to create a semi-open world experience, with randomized procedurally generated assets and puzzles in an attempt to stay away from linearity in the game's structure. Plot details would instead be filed away in discoverable documents sprinkled throughout the world, allowing for the player to engage with the narrative at their own leisure, rather than having it pile up as the game goes on. And while weaponry was present within the game, the developers specifically reiterated that firefights and combat would not be at the forefront of the game's design, and they purposefully created them to be used in the most clunky and sluggish ways possible. This made it possible to treat the weapons as a valuable rarity, while providing tactical advantages in combat encounters as well as puzzle mechanics at the same time, without giving too much power to the player. The Bunker sets itself apart from previous titles in the Amnesia series in many ways. Despite being a successor to Dark Descent and Machine for Pigs, and being a predecessor to Rebirth, the game dabbles in each of the things that made those games feel special, while trying very hard to make it its own presence within the franchise. You get an intelligent satisfaction out of making the treacherous journey around the bunker while avoiding the deadly monstrosity chasing you and solving the cryptic puzzles laid in place. There's an innate fear as you creep through the darkness, knowing that despite your armaments and your wit, you are absolutely, most definitively, not the predator in these halls. With the added lengths taken to enhance the diversity in gameplay within this title, you truly get the sense that you are actively participating in this world, rather than simply being guided on the tour through it like in previous titles. There's an immaculate amount of work on the developer's behalf to force the player to be absorbed by this terrible, dark place. The halls and lurking scratches of creatures just out of sight echo back to Frictional's origin works of Penumbra, while alluring you with the grotesque mysticism that Amnesia has become known for, while giving you a stifling sensation of dread in that of the unknown that forces its way into you like that of Soma. The Bunker, in my opinion, is the culmination of everything that Frictional Games has learned to date. This game proves the value in all the crippling, harrowing agony that comes with the anticipation of monsters lurking within the darkness. Frictional Games started their illustrious career as game developers in probably the most complicated way possible, and that was by building their own physics engine to create the titles that they would go on to produce in-house. In fact, multiple iterations of this same engine have been made public domain for others to tweak and create with. It's this signature game engine that gives Frictional's projects their unique flair. It relies heavily on interactable objects in the environment, and allows the player to do neat things with simple props like crates, barrels, chairs, etc. If you come across a wall or a blockade that's just a bit too tall to jump over, you can oftentimes drag an item close to it and then mantle over the wall. If the player discovers a weird bottleneck like a crack or a crevice in the wall that's boarded up, the player can grapple with them to break and dismantle them to clear the way. But this system isn't limited to just this interesting setup, and actually, the bunker promotes this line of thinking constantly. There are several puzzles the player must solve by obtaining a key or an item of some kind, but there are almost just as many paths that need opening by exploiting the way this engine works. Whether it's picking up a brick to bust down a locked door, or by pulling objects together to build a makeshift hiding place. This particular entry in the Amnesia series makes full use of its environment and the engine that forms it to create an immersive experience. The first aspect that most people have to contend with in the bunker's design is that the game takes place in a bunker. I don't know how many of you have ever set foot inside a military bunker, or just any underground facility in the first place for that matter, but the short of it is this: these places can be confusing to navigate. There are no open spaces in a traditionally built place like this. It would be structurally unstable. As such, the majority of the time spent walking around will be within narrow hallways and tunnels, propped up by wood and concrete pylons. And since the builders would have to get as much use out of this space as possible, a lot of corridors often double back on each other and will circle around frequently. If you hadn't spent any time in a place like this before, it would get pretty easy to get lost down here. Thankfully, there are signs posted in the main halls to help guide the player to where they need to be, but this maze-like design harkens on the second aspect to navigation in this game, maintaining the electricity and lighting up the facility. A diesel generator rests within the only safe room, and it's the only power source for the whole bunker. You learn in a document that the beast dislikes the light, and only comes out when provoked. So on top of trying to keep track of where you are as you stumble through a maze, you also have to pay attention to how much fuel you have on hand and how long you have left until the next blackout, potentially exposing you to the clutches of the monster. Another notable mention for this game's design is that unlike previous entries within the Amnesia series, the bunker takes a step away from linear progression in favor of a self-described semi-open world level format. In other Frictional titles, the player would be taken from hub to hub, tasking them with missions that made them search for items that would need to get put together for the solution to progress the story. But once the player had accomplished that mission and crossed the previously impassable threshold, they couldn't return to that area again. The story progressed linearly, and the difficulty would scale with that progression. But in the bunker, that methodology was tossed out the window completely. This game operates more on a task-based structure system, giving the player a checklist of things to do in a sealed arena. This entire bunker is yours to explore, eventually. There are some sections that are cordoned off and are only accessible after you retrieve the necessary tools, which are also needed to finish the story, so you end up getting them all eventually. With a less linear game progression system, the player is capable of approaching whichever tasks they wish to do first. Whether they head to the maintenance wing to retrieve the wrench, or descend into the soldiers' quarters for the arsenal door code, is entirely left up to the player, and their proficiency with the mechanics and understanding of the bunker map will only bolster their capabilities. This sort of open-ended design allows for an extreme amount of replayability, and once the player has some knowledge of where the items are stored and how the monster behaves, it all comes down to preference. Speaking of the monster, let's talk about this guy. The game refers to this thing as the Beast, or the Stalker. The fans have also taken to affectionately calling him the Rat King too. Whatever you want to call him, he's gonna be another major sticking point that most players will have to contend with when playing the bunker. Back in 2014, Dark Descent popularized a different kind of enemy creature design in horror video games. The kind where the player has no direct way to confront the thing that's chasing them. Think other games like Outlast, Slender Man. The bunker decides to flip this series formula on its head though, by giving the player 2 usable guns and several thrown explosives. For once, it's a semblance of self-defense provided to the player, but this ability to fight back doesn't come without a cost. The guns were intentionally designed to be clunky and slow to use, forcing the player to deal with realistic recoil, and on top of that, the player has to manually reload each round they wish to fire. If the player isn't careful, they'll aim their weapon at the beast with the old used rounds from the last time they fired the gun still in the chamber. Trying to chuck a grenade at the monster that's chasing you is also just incredibly impractical. What's more, this thing can't actually be eliminated during normal gameplay. You can shoot, burn, and explode him as much as you like, but depending on your difficulty level and how many times you've shot it previously, the creature will either turn around and flee back into one of his rat holes to heal, or it will just simply stand up and continue to attack you. The most common method of contending with the beast is to simply avoid him whenever you possibly can instead of one-on-one confrontations. The player is given several ways to maneuver the game, both quietly and well lit, and as the monster is attracted to loud noises and abhors the light, taking preventative measures is often the most optimal, not to mention safest, way of having to deal with him. Anytime you move around in this game, you emit some form of noise. This includes everything from moving furniture and breaking doors, to tripping flare traps and agitating the man-eating rats, or simply just walking and running around. Even your wind-up flashlight, which never runs out of battery but will only stay powered for a certain amount of time, can attract the stalker if you overwind the thing and force it to make this wretched grinding noise. But alongside these numerous noise-making detractions, there are also a few clever tactics the player can adopt to foster a more stealthy approach to navigation and puzzle solving. While the player is allowed complete maneuverable freedom, walking instead of sprinting through the halls reduces their noise level, and you can even crouch down and crawl along the floors and under tables and shelves to reduce it even more. If the player goes out of their way to acquire a handheld lighter from one of the dead soldiers' lockers, they can combine items in their inventory to craft a torch, which not only burns quietly and provides sufficient light, but when used as a weapon, can stave off the bloodthirsty rats causing obstructions in the tunnels. It all depends solely on how far the player is willing to go to get over their personal comfort and play on the side of speed and efficiency. In this game, you're always trading benefits for detriments as you play. Alongside the numerous personal hazards that threaten the player throughout the game, several environmental factors take effect that directly results in additional challenges that the player must overcome to progress in the game. Frictional decided that the most terrifying attribute they could apply to their already stacked arrangement of horrors would be a system of randomized information crucial to advancement within the game. While objects needed to story progression will always appear at a designated zone, these being the dynamite explosives in the arsenal and the fuse plunger in the Roman tunnels, the codes you need to get into the arsenal in the first place, as well as the lockers of the French soldiers, are randomly arranged and placed on different bodies in every playthrough. Vital equipment like the spare lockdown rotary handle or the uniquely shaped vent bolt wrench are placed within the locker room in the main hall. However, not only are the corpses of the dead soldiers scattered around the bunker in far and away places being eaten by hostile flesh-eating rats, but the codes themselves are changed every time you start a new campaign, and sometimes a body won't even have a code on them. Thankfully, the game at least keeps track of what name had what code attached to it, but there's still a bunch of missing information here, and the bodies and their locations aren't even kept track of on the main map in the safe room. Oh yeah, the safe room. Probably the one saving grace bestowed upon the player in this entire game. The Stalker is this hulking, clawed monstrosity, but it isn't content with roaming the halls being so sensitive to the light, so its main method of travel is tunneling into the walls and making a network around the bunker. The structure itself was made in a hurry, and as such, a lot of it is made out of wood. Doors, tables, crates, and all that other jazz can be moved and used as simple blockades, but it's easily breakable for the monster, and sometimes they don't even do a good job of slowing it down. Your only chance of survival after being spotted is to break line of sight in the halls and hide quickly, or make your way back into this one room in the entire place that has concrete floors and walls with 2 metal doors that can be locked from the inside. This safe room is essentially your hub, and it has access to both sides of the bunker, a facility-wide map on the wall, a storage chest for tools and loot, and has the aforementioned diesel generator in the basement. You can plan your next move, you can strategize, you can take a breather here. As long as you're within the confines of this room, you cannot be harmed by the beast. Well, you can't be, at least until this thing gets wise to your antics. After achieving at least one of the story crucial items for progression, the Stalker decides to do what he does best and finds a weak spot in one of the walls and tunnels right into the safe room, giving him an entry and an exit, forcing the player to be on their guard everywhere, even in what used to be your own place of solace in this dark hellhole. The bunker, as an Amnesia game, is pretty unique when compared to its peers. While a lot of the other games in Frictional's lineup may put an emphasis on puzzle solving and narrative immersion, they all follow a relatively similar structure. After you've solved a puzzle and made it to the next hub, your puzzle is completely different and you have a new series of rooms to explore. But the bunker's only mission is simple: survive. You're given an arena with an arrangement of tasks. The end goal is always the same, and that's to break out of this place. How you get there, and the way you go about it, is left up to the player's ingenuity. The Stalker is doing exactly as his namesake implies, and therein lies the challenge. If you can get over this guttural fear of being hunted by something larger, faster, deadlier than you, then the bunker is your playground. It sets a new precedent for the series, one that I hope is continued into newer entries in this franchise. The clever application of randomized elements to make each playthrough different, on top of that classic Frictional game strategy and puzzle solving, really brings this game together for me. The player is constantly challenged in multiple ways, whether it's map memorization of a dark and unstable place, or finding the most efficient way to complete your tasks without getting spotted or killed, or simply in indulging the collection and lore gathering aspect of the game. There's truly something here for everybody. A new arrangement of systems and mechanics to help decorate a franchise that has, for the most part, had its fanbase predicting and contending with every trick that they thought Frictional knew. Turns out, there was plenty left in their book to keep us on our toes, and it's all on full display right here in this one. Unlike most of Frictional's other games, the bunker took a huge step back from the science fiction and cult mysticism, and the story that unfolds within it is possibly one of the most grounded, realistic narratives in the lineup. This game takes place within the throes of battle, smack in the middle of the First World War during a conflict between France and Germany. The game is already brutal enough, what with the pitch black tunnels and the horrific monster prowling the halls. But the bunker bears down on the brutality of conflict by giving the player a solid 10 or 15 minutes of the trench warfare that was commonplace during the Great War. It's effective, both as a tutorial sequence and also as a tone tone setter. Most horror games have a moment of tranquil anticipation leading up to when the bad stuff starts to happen. You know there's something awful about to transpire, but you haven't quite reached it yet. Very few of these kinds of games take the time to show a before and after approach in the environments that you'll be exploring. The bunker gives us a taste of the state of the world before we're isolated and alone. Despite the core of this game taking place within a military defense bunker, there's still one of the biggest, most brutal wars in history going on right outside the door. A sorry state of affairs, but one that's entirely needed to really drive home the despair of the situation. Even should Henry escape the clutches of the beast, there's still an entire war machine to contend with just outside. It's sort of unclear how long Henry and his platoon have been stationed here. While the game begins with him falling into a trench, holding only a sidearm, he still behaves as if things aren't entirely new to him. Like he knows how to proceed through the embankment and where the destination is. But there's also still a fair number of troops with him stationed at the bunker. Well, that's before the game actually starts anyway. It's to the point where they have regular patrols and roam the battlefield during the day. Nevertheless, the group of soldiers still commit to acting like brothers in this god-awful place, with the sense of camaraderie that you can detect even through the post-mortem notes left after the stalker arrives. Each of the soldiers here have their own little quirks, things that they like and dislike, habits that they formed, and the poor saps that got picked on way too often. We learn towards the beginning that Henry is a bit of a gambler, using dice and card games to determine his choices. This is what sends his closest friend Augustin on his patrol and becomes a major twist of fate. This theme gets iterated on in a journal entry the amnesiac Henry will write, where he admits that he knew how to rig the game in his favor. Aside from that though, other soldiers are explained to have passions as well. Like this one soldier who's a bit of a history buff, having learned the ancient and dead languages. Or this one guy that ends up becoming the brunt of everybody's joke, to the sad point where he ends up being the first to die within the bunker. This bunker also plays host to a structure of Roman roots as well. While digging out the tunnels, the soldiers find a network of ancient hallways, buried and lost to time. This is just about the only reference to occultism in the entire game, unlike the other Amnesia titles past where the main story is surrounded by it. One of the soldiers on Henry's platoon, a man named Alex Neuer, was particularly fascinated with this location and studied it to the best of his abilities. His journal describes a series of ritualistic meeting grounds, with decor and weathering that suggests a level of antiquity dating far back to the 2nd century. Though architecture and artifacts from these tunnels suggest Roman origin, Neuer notes that there are several objects of interest and writings describing varying levels of otherworldly superstition, eventually coming to the conclusion that these tunnels were the meeting grounds for, quote, sadistic bacchanals, blood orgies, and brutal trials by combat. Multiple notes refer to a world of darkness, a sort of other world where awful monsters resided and human beings were tortured without mercy. While Neuer continued to warn the other soldiers about potential misfortune that might become them if they continued to desecrate the dig site, the rest of the platoon shrugged him off and continued their excavation in an attempt to get a flank behind the German front. He was later imprisoned in the bunker's cells for insubordination after he continued to attempt dissuading his compatriots' advances. Upon his release, and hearing that several of the other soldiers had begun to see shadows and hear whispers, Neuer was driven mad after his own excursion and was never mentioned again by anyone. Two characters we do have more information on though are the main duo focused on in the game, Henry Clement and Augustin Lambert, neither of whom knew each other from before the war, but became very good friends and teammates. Henry is the player character, a young man who is conscripted during his required coming-of-age French military training. Augustin also comes from a similar background, coming from a small town with a wife and son. Together, the two were grouped into the same squad and shipped to the Western Front in an effort to push back the German army's advance. Henry and Augustin would become fast friends, finding much in common and getting into all sorts of trouble together. One of Henry's journal entries describes the shenanigans leading up to their stationing at the bunker, including Lambert's pissing into Henry's water canteen just for the hell of it, and a nondescript encounter with an unlucky barmaid one evening. In an effort to settle the score, Henry manufactures a game of chance to settle an assignment of patrol duty. Feeling like he's finally got the upper hand against his friend, Henry rigs the game in his favor to make Augustin go out on the patrol. When he doesn't return on time, Henry begins to panic, having the belief that he may have perished, and so the sensitive duality of Henry's character begins to show itself. Despite becoming amnesiac from an explosion during Augustin's retrieval, Henry knows that he's done something wrong, that a simple game of chance possibly ended his friends and his own lives just for the fun of it. The main story of the bunker can be separated now into two parts: before Henry and Augustin's game of chance, and after Henry wakes from his coma. While we don't have a lot of information regarding the beginnings of the war or even much background into their characters as a whole, it is these guys' relationship that gets strained and focused on in the numerous letters and notes left within the French bunker. Because of its location and the dates left on the paper documents and the area, we can deduce that the game takes place during or just after July of 1916, placing it right at the start of the Somme offense being conducted by the British and the French versus the German front pushing west. The French would have installed several fortifications, such as this eponymous bunker, in an effort to create a foothold and push through the main battleground. The conflict will have just begun, however, as this fight historically doesn't end until November of the same year. It's here where the main story begins, with Henry and his unit being deployed to the frontline trenches, walking straight into a German ambush. The French soldiers must battle their way through a terrible scrap in the middle of the no man's land, with Augustin saving Henry from a gas attack at the last second. They are successful in at least evading their pursuers, and are able to return to the bunker by which they were stationed. That same night, Henry and Augustin play their game of chance, leading to Augustin taking the patrol that leaves him wounded. During the effort to retrieve him, Henry gives his friend a drink from the water in the crater that they're sunk in, before being caught by German soldiers assaulting their retreat. An explosion goes off directly behind them, knocking Henry into a coma on the battlefield. From here, a multitude of things begins going wrong within the bunker. Several of the soldiers begin having second thoughts during combat, a small band of mutineers intentionally sabotages operation within the bunker, and Augustin begins undergoing a harrowing transformation. The true purpose of the Roman tunnels eludes the commanding officers at the bunker, and combined with the soldiers in mutiny, takes a toll on the staff morale. The Roman tunnels are sealed by some of the soldiers in an effort to save the rest of them from hell. One of the soldiers takes note of how the local flora and fauna have changed, with earthly tremors from underneath becoming more frequent, and the feral rats becoming misshapen and aggressive. The men began to comment on hearing a sinister howling from within the bunker walls, fearing that the Roman tunnel's curse may have crept in despite their efforts. Henry remains comatose, coming to every now and again in complete amnesiac confusion, not knowing where or when he is, or even what his own name is. Augustin, having no answers from his prayer at the chapel, and without the support of his friend, begins suffering in isolation. Having haunting visions and a persistent itch to act on violence, Augustin begins to break down to ranting and raving within his quarters. On July 16th, the Beast makes his first appearance, misshapen and belligerent, attacking the French soldiers one by one and obliterating the unit within their own bunker. Several of the top brass make the unfortunate coward's decision to flee the bunker, leaving the rest of their men trapped below as they blow up the only known entrance to the facility. Stuck in the dark with little to no options, the men begin to break up into groups and attempt to survive, and maybe even kill this new monstrous threat that has descended upon them. Some attempt to create an escape plan, creating a detonation trigger to blow the entryway back open. Others attempt to hide in the far corners of the bunker, cowering in fear and praying for their lives. In the midst of this bloody chaos, Henry Clement wakes from his coma, stable, confused, and very alone. He finds the last surviving member of his unit, who explains the only way out of the bunker before being dragged into a hole and killed by the beast. From here, the actual gameplay starts to happen, with players taking control of Henry as they navigate the desolate bunker. Henry must retrieve a bundle of dynamite by unlocking the arsenal with a code procured by the communications radio, where one of Henry's former commanding officers tries to make contact with any survivors. He must then make his way back into the destroyed Roman tunnels, where the last explosive's detonator handle is believed to be. Upon trying to open the exit, Henry's misfortune continues as the explosives instead cause a complete cave-in, opening a small sinkhole into the ground. The hole leads to a giant gladiatorial arena where he faces down the stalker one last time before making it through a crevice back onto the French-German battlefield. If you were to describe the narrative of the bunker in one word, it would most certainly have to be tragic, and not simply because of the fact that so many people are brutally killed, or because the nature of conflict is so tragic in the first place, but more so because this game as a whole is filled with an extreme number of personal tragedies that branched out to affect more than one singular person. On top of being a unit in the military during World War I, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, the actions of the soldiers within the bunker ultimately led to their own demise, whether willingly or not. The shadows and haunting mysticism of the Roman cult arena poisoned the soldiers' morale. It made them see and hear things, made them act upon destructive desires. Very quickly, the group goes from complete trust in their battlefield camaraderie to suspecting each other of conspiring mutiny. Trust and sanctity go completely out the window when people start showing up dead. Henry and Augustine's friendship has to be the most tragic twist of fate in the whole game though. In an attempt to get out of his duties and rigging that chance game, Henry sacrifices his closest friend in this war-torn hellscape, and in an effort to make things right, seals his fate with this one sip of what's supposed to be life-giving water. It instead morphs and changes Augustine into a killing machine, forgetting nearly all semblances of his former self in gratifying rage. All that would be left of him is the memory of his son in the face of this rabbit doll, battered and worn down from enduring the hate, grief, and agony of war. Upon release for the PC, PS4, and Xbox Series systems, Amnesia: The Bunker received mostly positive reviews from review outlets and the general audience alike. The game received an aggregate score of 77 out of 100 on Metacritic, with most of the criticism being placed on the perceived lack of a narrative that the franchise had become known for. Eurogamer gave the game 4 out of 5 stars, with contributor Vicky Blake saying in her review, quote, "The Bunker corrects the missteps of its predecessors and adds in a sense of invention, creating a truly unsettling adventure." The game earned an 8 out of 10 from GameSpot, where author Mark Delaney had this to say in his article, quote, "Amnesia: The Bunker is proof that Frictional has still got it. This is a team that continues to refine the horror genre, and though I've found each of their games intriguing in different ways, they haven't scared me the way that this one does in a long time." More general praise was given to the game by the player base for its map design and the layers to each puzzle, as well as the resource management involving ammunition and generator fuel. Spotlight was also drawn to the game's presentation, specifically to the overwhelming sense of tension brought on by the auditory design of the stalker and its unscripted encounters throughout the experience. Ultimately, most players of the bunker are going to fall into one of two categories, based on the kind of preferences that they have have towards video games. Because previous entries in the franchise often feel a bit more linear and can put a bit of an emphasis on the narrative, a decent sized portion of the people might be turned off by the gameplay-centric nature that the bunker seeks to deliver. You definitely don't get the same experience out of this game that you would out of Dark Descent or Rebirth, but that does beg the question, is this an inherently bad change? What does this new focus apply to the established formula of the Amnesia games? I personally believe that there's an obvious distance created to separate this game from the others, but I also don't believe that it's for a bad reason. The bunker feels like Frictional attempting to break new ground and establish new design philosophies. The focus on gameplay goes a long way to make this experience unforgettable. It's true that it's unlike the other games in a more meta sense, but that gives this game its own identity. The bunker should be recognized as an experiment, but also as a promise of more to come. I could see a world where these mechanics are fleshed out and applied across the larger map, perhaps with more characters and even with multiple places of interest. While it's true that they likely would have to break a few of their own new rules to establish a more immersive narrative, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see these new facets of design make their way into the next unspecified game in Frictional's future. The bunker was made to be something special. It plays on the self-titled amnesiac feature very well, putting us in the place of a nondescript soldier in one of the most grueling conflicts in human history. But it isn't afraid to strip all of that away and remind us that we are, in the end, just a man in a barren, desolate place, forced to stare into the abyss and hope that nothing stares back. Whereas previously, the main character always has a mission or an objective that they must accomplish at all costs, Henry's only goal from the minute that he wakes up in the bunker is to survive. There is no rhyme or reason to this quest, no ultimate goal above all else. The player is dropped into this place and must simply do everything they can to remain alive. Sometimes they'll have to use their creativity, sometimes they'll have to use their strength, but above all else, they will have to remain undeniably, unceasingly cautious. There is always going to be some kind of danger here as Henry proceeds through the bunker, either simply by the ravenous stalker, or the less ambitious rats, or even the soldiers themselves having posthumous defiance blowing things up with tripwire traps. There is no ebb and flow of calm and anxiety in this game. You are always on the run, always being preyed upon. There is no hub of rooms to separate you from the thing that you're running away from. It's constant everywhere you go. In every dark corner, in every narrow corridor, the player will be forced to come to grips with terrors of all shapes and sizes. Perhaps therein lies the bunker's greatest asset. The very fiber of this game wishes you to remain aware of this constant threat of the unknown. When I played the bunker for this video, there were multiple times where I just wanted to give up and stop playing. So many times that I was scared to advance. It only occurred to me a few hours into my playthrough that I was actually on the controlling end of a video game. That's how immersive this thing is. You forget that while you're on the receiving end of a lot of brutal torture and manipulation, that at the end of the day, this is still an interactive experience on your own whim. The beast is a creature that you can predict, that you can analyze. But when you're playing the actual game, when you're crawling on the ground as you try to outwit this abomination in a lethal game of cat and mouse, you don't feel like you're in a virtual world. That fear is real, and it will get to you. The dim yellow lights will surround you, enveloping you in a false sense of safety as you hear the stalker skitter from one rat hole to the next. When the lights finally black out across the bunker halfway through your expedition into the unknown, that terror grips you in a stifling chokehold. You know what happens in the darkness. You know what's lurking behind the walls. You've seen, personally, what he's done to the others that he catches. And the next time, it could be you that he drags away. In the cruelest of situations possible, Henry rigged the game from the start against himself. At your own peril, you have manifested a fate befitting a cheat, and it will come to haunt your every move for as long as you're alive down here. An agonizing fate, one left stuck wandering the hollow depths of the piercing anticipation of your own demise. I want to thank you all very much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. If you liked what you saw during this video, feel free to drop me a big ol' thumbs up and consider hitting the subscribe button for future videos like this one. Go ahead and share this video with your friends and other video game enthusiasts, and I'll catch you next time. Remember to stay awesome and to be kind and rewind. Have a wonderful night. Excelsior!